Healed by Cancer, written by Jayka Duncan, narrated by Jayka Duncan. To the loves of my life, Ian, Jelena, and John, you will always be in the sanctuary of my heart. Introduction. The gift. Without knowing it, I had basically lived in a perpetual state of dis-ease most of my life. This particular state had been my norm for so many decades that I had forgotten what it felt like to live with ease. I was oblivious. Even when I was happy, my subconscious was still ill at ease. The undercurrent of my dis-eased existence was that of a low energetic vibration that festered mercilessly in my body for decades. Cancer was my messenger of this state of dis-ease and was essentially a gift. It was to be my choice whether or not I decided to unwrap this gift. Lucky for me, I was given 2 chances at it. The first time I received the gift of cancer was in May of 2007. At that time, I didn't even know that there was an option to unwrap this gift, never mind to acquire the tool to unwrap it. Therefore, the gift remained unopened. The second time I received the gift of cancer was in December of 2016. It took a while, but I eventually managed to discover the tool that would unwrap this gift. This book is about the discovery and effective use of this tool, the tool of surrendering. Surrendering painstakingly unwrapped this infinite gift of cancer, layer by layer, until I had fully experienced post-traumatic growth and was presented with the ultimate gift of freedom. Writing and publishing this book is one example of my dedication to surrendering. This book is so far out of my comfort zone, it has made me feel quite vulnerable at times. The writing of it alone has made me squirm more than once. I am and will be sharing secrets that used to trigger shame. I'm showing people my inner world, a world that I had covered up so carefully. I will be bearing my soul in a raw and real way throughout this book. Yes, there will likely be people who will shun me because of it, but I have to believe that there will also be people who will be inspired by me to do the same and become more authentic themselves. This book is about letting go of my image, this false identity that I'd put out in the world for so many years. It's a story that touches on every area of my life, at home and at work, in relationships, with money, sexually, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and of course, physically. I want to share this story, even though parts of it are deemed inappropriate by a good portion of society. I can hear the questions already. Why on earth would you want to hang your dirty laundry out for everyone to see? Are you crazy? Considering the things that I will be writing about are all things I did and got away with without getting caught, I can definitely see the crazy in that. But here's the thing. I didn't really get away with it after all. As it turns out, I was my own worst judge in regards to some of my behaviors. As a result of my actions, feelings of self-judgment and shame festered in my body and created a cancer over the years. As my sister-in-law so aptly put, secrets will eat you up. She's right. You know what else will eat you up? Cancer. I am able to tell this story now because I no longer identify with the women who experienced those things. I have surrendered and released the guilt and shame and cultivated self-love and self-worth in its place. I want to share my story to show how incredibly important self-allowance, self-forgiveness, and self-love really are. I mean, they healed me of metastatic cancer. If that was all they did, it would have been incredible. But learning to love myself and feeling worthy has gifted me so much more. And considering that it's highly unlikely that I'm alone in this, that we've likely all done things that we're not proud of or have skeletons in our closets, these stories may just create aha moments and potential healing for a few of you out there. Who knows? This is my story of how I was healed by cancer. Part 1. Trial and Error. I call the first 18 months of my journey with recurring breast cancer the trial and error phase. Yes, trial and error was the name of the game, and unfortunately, I was at the losing end of it. I was driven to heal my body, and it was exhausting. Ironically, unbeknownst to me at the time, this driven state of doing was exactly what stood in the way of healing my body. I lived in a world of denial and was completely unaware that fear was the driving force of my life. I had an intuitive knowing at that time that it would get worse before it would get better. And it did. I found that's what happens when you put fear in the driver's seat. Chapter 1. Getting the Diagnosis. December 2016. I'm sitting in the driver's seat of my car, by myself, in the parking lot, crying, screaming, angrily banging my fist on the steering wheel. I am scared shitless. I feel my carefully designed, precious little world crumbling around me. What the hell had just happened? Did it even happen? Maybe it was all a dream because it sure as hell felt surreal. Maybe I misinterpreted the whole situation. After all, I wasn't actually told anything. The doctor had just poked the crap out of me with a needle without saying a word. But I sensed it. The writing was on the wall. Shit, what am I going to do now? I didn't want to think about it. I pushed down my fears, dried my tears, take a few deep gulps of air, and put the keys in the ignition. As the car started, the radio comes on. Katy Perry's song, Hear Me Roar, blasts out of the speakers. Well, if that isn't a sign from the universe, I don't know what is. And yes, universe, you're gonna hear me roar, goddammit. I look at the clock, 2:22 p.m. These 3 consecutive numbers are my little sign that my favorite angel, my mom, is here with me. I feel her beautiful, supportive love throughout the whole car. It actually makes me laugh through my tears. All right, I say out loud, I got this. And off I go. I make my way home. It is a drive that I'll never forget. From thoughts of, bring it on, I've got tools now to deal with this shit, to thoughts of, oh my God, what if I can't? What if this is it? To, I'm totally overreacting. Maybe I'm just worried for nothing. My inner world is turning into a gong show. Somehow, I arrive home safely. It has been the longest 3-hour drive of my life. Somewhere down the highway, I made the decision not to tell my family about my fears. No sense in worrying them about it. They did a biopsy, I'll tell them. But it'll be nothing. It's just scar tissue. They're just making sure that that's all it is. Can you say denial? Well, this denial thing worked so well for me that a week later I showed up by myself at my family doctor's office to get the results. Feeling calm and confident that I had in fact overreacted, I watched the doctor come into the little room where I was waiting. She sat down and looked at me with a very serious expression. You have cancer. I think the doctor continued talking. I saw her lips move anyway, but nothing more was registering. I sat there in a daze. My vision got blurry. My cheeks heated up as I felt anger bubbling to the surface. Tears were rolling down my cheeks. The doctor must have stopped talking, as she was now sitting quietly watching me while handing me a tissue box. I took one tissue and proceeded to throw the box across the room. It was uncharacteristic of me. It startled her. In a bit of an awkward fashion, the doctor got up. I could tell this wasn't easy for her either. I need to call my husband Ian. Can I stay until he gets here? I asked her, not wanting to be seen crying in the public waiting room. Of course, take as long as you need, she replied. In between sobs, I managed to give Ian a couple of key words that had him bolting out of his office and at the medical clinic in record time. I wasn't ready to go home to our kids just yet, so we went for a drive. It was a quiet drive, each of us in our own torturous thoughts. Looking out the window from the passenger seat of our car, I noticed that the world had just continued on as if nothing had changed. We picked up some lunch at a drive-thru, as if it was just another ordinary day. Wanting something to distract me, I took a bite of my lunch. I chewed slowly and tried to swallow, but the food got stuck in my throat. I swallowed a couple more times. It hurt, but it finally went down. Food wasn't going to make this better, I guess. Having no concept of time, we got back home to our 2 kids later in the day. Because Jelena and John had no school due to the Christmas break, they were both at home. I received some news today that will likely shake things up a little in our family, is how I started one of the most difficult conversations of my life. The cancer is back. I could see all kinds of emotions come across our kids' faces. I stood up and suggested, let's have a group hug. The 4 of us hugged for a while when I made the next suggestion. Let's scream. This will release some of our pent-up emotions. I think I was the only one who screamed. The sound that came out of my mouth was so guttural, so raw, that I sounded like an animal in agony. It was a horrific sound, and it scared the kids. "Mom, please stop," I heard John say. There were tears once again flowing down my cheeks. My beautiful little family looked at me with so much love as they hugged me a little tighter. Through the agony, I could feel the gratitude of having them in my life. I was blessed. Not wanting to ruin the Christmas season for our friends and extended family, we chose to keep the news to ourselves and managed to get through Christmas, my birthday, and New Year's Eve under the pretense that everything was fine. Putting my expertise of pushing down those pesky emotions and covering them up with a smile to the test. I gave a performance that was worthy of an Academy Award. Any chance I had, I took my cute little therapy dog, Nico, out onto the trails where I would let my armor down a bit. This was the time that I would allow myself to feel the anger that I so often pushed down when around others. Angry thoughts such as, really? Have I not done everything in my power to prevent cancer from coming back? I've cut back on work. I eat healthy. I exercise. My relationship with Dad is much better. I've taken loads of self-help courses. What gives already? What gives already would be the million-dollar question whose answer eluded me for more than 2 years. What a journey of trial and error those 2 years proved to be. It was a journey of frustration, growth, despair, patience, forgiveness, anger, compassion, fear, learning about self-love and self-worth, and last, but definitely not least, surrender. Chapter 2, Doing It My Way. Finally, we'd made it through the holiday season. January 2017 arrived, a new year, and hopefully it would bring a new perspective. My brain fog had lifted a bit, so it was time to buckle down and make some difficult choices. I had already made the decision that chemo would never be an option for me again. Been there, done that. But I hadn't really figured out anything else beyond that. A few more blood tests and scans were scheduled to check that the cancer wasn't anywhere else in my body. I also agreed to meet with the surgeon, even though I wasn't 100% sure that I would choose surgery. The surgeon was a friendly young man who took some time to examine me and then informed me that I had the same type of cancer that I had 10 years prior. And with it also being in the same location, he surmised that the tumor likely never left my body. It had just been dormant all these years and eventually had grown about 3 times larger than it had originally been in 2007. How can that be? Was my immediate reaction. I had surgery where the chunk that was taken out of my breast was at least 5 times larger than the size of the tumor. On top of that, I had chemo and radiation. I was confused. How can that be? Well, he answered, Sometimes cancer cells can be so resilient that they dodge the surgery and survive all treatments. Those resilient cancer cells have multiplied in your breast over the past 10 years and formed a tumor 3 times larger than before. Wow, are you kidding me? This was definitely something to consider. We left the hospital with next week's appointment slip in hand, which would be when we would discuss other test results and possibly set a date for surgery. So let me get this straight, I later said to Ian when we got into the car. If this tumor now consists of a whole bunch of offspring of those resilient cells that survived 10 years ago, then what makes the surgeon think that having surgery and chemo would be successful this time? As I pondered this, a quote came to mind by the brilliant Albert Einstein that goes something like this: "Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity." Well, I might be a lot of things, but I'm not insane. At least not yet, anyway. With that in mind, along with meditating on it and weighing out the pros and cons, I came to the decision that I would not choose surgery at that time. I was willing to be open to changing my mind if needed in the future, but in that moment, it just didn't feel right for me. With that decision made, off we went to the hospital a few days later for our second appointment. Let's just say that the vibe in the surgeon's office was not quite as pleasant this time around when I broke the news to him of my decision not to have surgery. I was so sure of this decision that I thankfully didn't buckle under the pressure that the surgeon laid on me. I'm sure he thought I'd fallen off my rocker, or maybe that I had drank a little too much spiked eggnog over the holidays. But the entire time that he was adamantly trying to convince me to have the surgery, using fear as ammunition, my thoughts were very conscious, overriding the fear. This is just his limited point of view. All he knows is Western medicine. There are other options. These thoughts kept me strong in my conviction while exasperating the surgeon. Over the following few months, I quickly realized that most of the Western medical staff were anything but supportive of my decision, making it painful to even get something as simple as a doctor's signature for insurance purposes. I felt like I had been red flagged. This is not to say that this is the case of all medical staff out there in the world of Western medicine. I'm sure that there are some that are open to alternative cancer healing methods. I just didn't have the pleasure of their company. Having confidently scratched Western medicine off my list, now I had to decide what holistic method to choose. For those of you who have never typed holistic cancer treatments into Dr. Google, give it a try. Actually, what comes up is a maze of information on the ins and outs of probably 1,000 different methods. From cutting-edge research of a variety of methods, to counter-research of those same methods, to success stories of this, that, or the other method, to an infinite amounts of ads for supplements with huge claims. All of it was mind-boggling and overwhelming, to say the least. What to do? What to choose? There were just too many options. It was quite overwhelming, and I knew that I needed to remove myself from civilization and get grounded in nature to gain any clarity on the matter. My friend owns a rustic cabin near a lake in the Canadian Rockies where I stayed for a few adventurous days to see if I could figure things out. The plan was to go within, quiet my mind, and tap into my intuition. It was February, with an average temperature of approximately minus 20 degrees Celsius. There I was, in the cabin, trying to stay warm by a malfunctioning wood stove, having to go outside to use the outhouse and relying on propane for lighting. I had never used a wood stove before, but how hard could it be? To make a long story short, I ended up sleeping on the floor in front of the wood stove to stay warm, and also to stay under the thick blanket of smoke that was perpetually hanging in the air. No matter what I tried, I could not work the stove without smoking out the cabin. Turns out, as I found out a week later from my fire chief friend, who owns the cabin, the chimney had been completely plugged up, and how sorry he was for that. It had been an adventure, that's for sure. I learned that you couldn't get too close to the stove or you'd melt your slippers, nor could you put your cup of tea on top of the stove because it would explode. All in all, it was still a beautiful getaway where, despite the cold, the sun shone brightly every day. I hiked around the area, breathing in the fresh air in awe of the beauty that surrounded me, and allowed Mother Nature to calm my mind. Refreshed and inspired to start my healing journey, I came back into civilization and made nutrition my first subject of research. I had always been quite a health-conscious eater, but I wanted to kick it up a notch. I was already drinking green smoothies and juices every day. After reading up on the healing benefits of plant-based alkaline foods, I decided to try a vegan diet. I had learned that disease thrives in an acidic environment. So off to the health store I went to purchase pH strips. I had the option of peeing on the strips or spitting on them. While using saliva seemed a less awkward method, apparently it's not as accurate as a urine test. Every morning I peed on a strip before breakfast and again at lunch and dinner time. The magic number to attain was 7. Every day my numbers were as low as 3. Indicating that my body was very acidic. After a couple of months of eating a vegan alkaline diet, my pH levels did not budge. Feeling very frustrated about this and realizing that just the act of testing my pH was creating more anxiety for me, I quit testing. Along with nutrition, I also researched holistic treatments and supplements. The sheer volume of information continued to be overwhelming, not helped by the fact that people who wanted to help me offered suggestions and sent information of different options for me to look at. Of course, I knew that they all meant well, but it tended to add more overwhelm to me than anything else. I did, however, take the advice of one individual and contacted a lady who apparently was a gifted healer. She had success with several other people by helping them heal from cancer. I was excited because not only did she live nearby, she also wouldn't take any money for her gift. Considering that I didn't have an income and was fighting my insurance company, that was a welcoming bonus. It unfortunately ended up being too good to be true. One area that I had been working on was to take charge of my own life, to trust my own intuition, and not assume that other people always knew more than me. My first and only conversation with this gifted lady consisted of her telling me that she would be willing to help me, but that I had to stop everything that I was doing and only follow her protocol. In other words, she wanted me to hand over the reins of my healing journey and let go of control. I won't lie, it was very tempting. After all, she was gifted, she was free, and there were success stories that backed her up. Deep down, however, I knew that this would be a backward step for me. There was the chance that I would possibly regress back to my old, disempowering beliefs. I thanked her for her time and continued on my journey with me at the helm. This didn't mean that I wasn't open to finding someone who was willing to educate me as well as suggest and discuss options with me. As a matter of fact, shortly after my conversation with the gifted healer, I learned of a holistic health coach, a lady who had healed herself of stage 4 cancer 15 years earlier. I decided to meet with her instead. She gave me lots to think about, along with providing some much-needed clarity on the subject and encouraged me to listen to my own intuition. Yay! She was speaking my language. I finally had something to sink my teeth into. And boy, did I sink my teeth into it in my usual somewhat OCD way. I chose a holistic doctor, had a bunch of tests done to figure out what the hell was going on in my body, and got the ball rolling. Chapter 3. My Insane Schedule. The year 2017 ended up being what I call the year of insanity. Although if you would have told me that while I was living it, I would have just shrugged my shoulders and smiled at you with a response such as, "I'm committed to healing my body." Boy, was I committed. A typical week for me consisted of driving 300 kilometers to the city on a Tuesday evening, staying at my brother's home overnight, and then driving to the clinic on Wednesday morning, where I'd be hooked up to an IV for 4 hours, getting juiced up with vitamin C. Once a month, I'd drive downtown to get blood samples taken. Then I'd drive across the city to my colonic lady to get flushed out. I'd arrive back at my brother's home sometime around dinner time and spend the night. The next day, I would do it all over again, except this time the IV pick of the day would either be glutathione or chelation. I'd once again drive across the city for my second colonic of the week. There were weeks that I'd also add in an acupuncture session or get something funky done, such as cupping. Then I'd drive the 300-kilometer journey home, but not before fitting in a Costco run. 35,000 kilometers were added to my car's odometer that year with me behind the wheel. And never once did I consider that this may be a sign that I was overdoing it just a wee bit. For the rest of the week, while I was at home, I had a pretty regimented detox program consisting of 30 minutes on a vibration machine to activate the lymphatic fluid, 20 minutes of sweating in my sauna bed, followed by an enema and a shower. I would then spend hours in the kitchen preparing homemade healthy food, juice greens, and keep track of 37 different kinds of supplements. Next, I would continue to research different cancer protocols, meditate, take the dogs for a walk, maybe fit in a nap, socialize with my friends and family, etc. I followed this action-packed schedule every day that I was at home, without fail. I went for a checkup at the cancer clinic every 6 months. As always, my nerves would be frazzled just by the thought of it. As the appointments came closer, my what-if scenarios ruthlessly danced around my brain, and my already sleep-deprived nights were filled with even more wakeful hours. During the mornings of my appointments, with my heart in my throat and a jittery body, I would make my way to the cancer clinic for my ultrasound checkup. The radiologist would calmly move the scanner over the tumor, not saying a word, while I was ready to explode with both fear and curiosity. In July 2017, I was told that there was possibly a 10% decrease of the tumor's size, but the radiologist couldn't be sure, explaining that he had to take human error into consideration. Therefore, it was essentially the same size as before, by his estimation. No change was written on the report. I refused to hear the human error part of his explanation and clung to the idea that the tumor had indeed shrunk 10%. I was both relieved and disappointed by these results. On the one hand, thank God that it hadn't grown, but only by 10%, if that? In December 2017, I had an ultrasound appointment that went much the same way. Once again, my results showed a shrinkage of 10%, which was once again nulled by the doctor given the human error factor, and no change was documented on my file. I had decided to start having infrared thermography tests done as well, but they also showed no change in my breast. Really? Ugh. After everything I'd given up and everything that I'd done, talk about frustration. No change just didn't cut it for me. The thought of, I guess I'd been a bit cocky when I believed I could have my body in tip-top shape within a year, was one of many that went through my mind. The other thoughts were more based around feeling I was letting my friends and family down. After all, they were rooting for me. What if I couldn't heal my body? What if I got it all wrong? Not to mention the I told you so's that I'd inevitably hear from the naysayers. My inner world was in turmoil, but I kept most of these thoughts to myself and covered them up with a smile, because that was the game I played. Nothing going on here. The truth was, my ego was hit pretty hard. I was feeling humbled and vulnerable. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders and was getting pretty exhausted by it all. Although I didn't realize it at the time, it was the beginning of a change in my perspective of this game called life. Up until that point, I had attacked my health crisis the only way I knew how, full force. I didn't realize then that the insane amount of effort that I put into this healing regime didn't just stress out and exhaust my body, but I was also doing it with an energy of desperation. Although I was oblivious then, I did eventually realize, much further down the road, that there would be no healing as long as my body was stressed, exhausted, and desperate. September 16th, 2017 was a much-needed, life-changing day. It was the day I participated in a San Pedro plant medicine ceremony in hopes that some light would be shed on the funk that I'd been in. I had participated in plant medicine ceremonies on numerous occasions in the past with amazing results, and I was ready to be inspired again. These ceremonies always gave me the gift of tapping into the wisdom of Source by having incredible chats with my higher self. This ceremony did not disappoint. I remember it well. I was sitting on a log by a lake surrounded by the beauty of the Rocky Mountains when the initial message came through. Don't let cancer stop you from living your dreams. This was the beginning of a beautiful, inspiring dialogue with my higher self in ceremony. What do you mean? Was my reply. Start traveling the world, of course, is what came through. But we can't afford it anymore. All of our savings have gone into paying for the medical treatments, was my instant comeback. Sell the house, was the simple reply. Sell my house? Really? This was definitely not something that I had ever contemplated, and yet the excitement that I felt rippling through my body was unmistakable. Sell our house? Travel the world? That would definitely add some much-needed excitement to my life. But what about all of our stuff? Was my next question, to which the quick reply was, sell that too. Holy cow! I couldn't tell you how long I sat on that log by the lake, continuing to be in the company of my higher self, but I can tell you that I felt more excited than I had ever felt in a very long time. When I came home, bubbling with excitement, I told Ian all about my ceremony and asked him if he was up to it. He replied, Am I ready to travel the world, you ask? I've been waiting for almost 30 years for you to be ready. Well, let's get packing, I said. And with that, we set our dream into motion. The next 5 months proved to be even more insane than before, as well as a bit daunting. But there was excitement in the air. We were on a mission getting rid of 99% of our belongings, 30 years worth of stuff. Let me tell you, that's not an easy feat. We sold lots, gave away a bunch more, and the rest we either recycled or threw away. It was a detox in and of itself. All the while, we were balancing this with my demanding healing and travel schedule and Ian's full-time job. I'm not going to lie, it was a gong show. But we did it. We officially reached the minimalist status by the end of the year and were ready to leave Canada. Before we left, I had a few more tests done. Blood tests, urine tests, stool tests were all taken to see if my body had absorbed any of the supplements and intravenous concoctions that I'd been taking. When the reports came back, the holistic doctor sat me down and gave me the bad news. My body had not absorbed anything. Nothing. Nada. I had spent tens of thousands of dollars and had literally gone down the toilet. Fuck. I remember asking the doctor, how can that be? The doctor had no answer other than that this sometimes happens. I know you're a spiritual woman, he said. I hope that you enjoy your travels and continue to meditate and find solace in that. This was the first time that I got the uncomfortable feeling that he didn't have high hopes for my mission to heal my body. I refused to give it much thought, however. Surely I would be able to heal my body while traveling the world. Chapter 4. The Game-Changing News. The much-awaited date had finally arrived. On February 6, 2018, after lots of goodbyes, a few of them tearful, we hopped on the plane, left the snow and freezing temperatures of Canada behind us, and were off to our first worldly destination. Jalapa, Mexico is a quaint little fishing village off the coast of Puerto Vallarta, where there isn't a high-rise hotel to be found, and the mode of transportation is often still by mule. We spent 10 whole weeks with sand between our toes, breathing in fresh ocean air, and going to sleep to the sound of the surf crashing on the shore. How does it get any better than that? Considering we'd never had more than 2 or 3 weeks of consecutive vacation days, 10 weeks seemed like forever. We made weekly trips to a holistic medical clinic in Puerto Vallarta, which was just a 45-minute water taxi trip away. They offered IV treatments, but I needed to give that a break. For one, my veins were in terrible shape from all the needles. I had a lot of scar tissue that had built up, and my veins were collapsing, making it painful and difficult to get a needle in anywhere. Along with that, in light of the test results I'd received earlier, I was no longer convinced that it was going to heal my body. I decided to meet with the American doctor that worked at the clinic to see what he recommended. This doctor had Western, Chinese, and holistic medical degrees. The man was brilliant. My ears are still buzzing from that first meeting. Talk about information overload. One of the practices that he promoted to restore the nutrients in my body was urophagia, aka urine therapy, aka drinking your own urine. What? Could I even do that? Believe it or not, I tried it. First, I drank lots of water so that the urine was diluted. Then I collected the urine and, you guessed it, bottoms up. Oh, the things I wouldn't do for a healthy body. Okay, maybe I didn't exactly go bottoms up with it. I took baby steps. First, I rubbed it on my lips. Surprisingly enough, it didn't taste that bad at all. Then, I put a drop on my tongue. Still, not too bad. Next, I took a teeny tiny little sip. That's when my mind stepped in and said, "Whoa, wait a minute, this is disgusting." And that was the end of that little experiment. Not wanting to totally give up on it, I decided to meditate on the question, will urine therapy heal my body from cancer? Tapping into my intuition gave me the answer I was secretly hoping for. Drinking urine felt heavy in my body, which told me that it indeed would not work. I scrapped that idea without hesitation. In the end, I booked weekly colonics at the clinic to help me with my bowel movements. That was it. I had no other treatments. I decided to do a full 180 concerning my healing regime and stop the insanity. I finally started to realize that my body needed rest. A lot of rest. As a result, there were many lazy days, lounging in the hammock, wandering the beach, floating in the ocean, doing yoga, meditating, and making new friends. Surely this is how my body could finally heal. It was all heavenly, and I was indeed feeling very relaxed. Would it be enough? Our time in Mexico flew by, and before I knew it, Ian left for Canada to help his ailing mum, while I was getting ready for my next worldly destination, Europe. First stop was England for 12 days, then 6 weeks in France, followed by 2 weeks in my birthland, the Netherlands. I met some fantastic people, saw some incredible sights, visited with my wonderful Dutch relatives, and took a couple of the journey courses by Brandon Bays, and had ample time to relax. All was well in my world. Or was it? Not quite. While in the Netherlands, I started to experience some stabbing pain in my breast and armpit, something that I had not felt before. This scared the crap out of me. Could it be that the cancer had spread into my lymph nodes? Just a thought alone caused my throat to close up and a knot to form in my stomach. I was freaked out and told no one about it. With Ian in Canada during this time, I didn't want to tell him this over the phone. I also didn't want to worry any of my relatives. I kept it to myself. At one point, I was out walking by myself, feeling raw and emotional. It had just finished raining. As I was crossing a small bridge, I looked to the right and there was a gorgeous cloud with a silver lining. Then I looked to the left, and there was a beautiful rainbow. I just stood there and took it in. The universe was yet again showing its magic, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. When I got back to my cousin's home, I Googled the spiritual meaning of both, and this is what I found. A cloud with a silver lining means that we should never feel hopeless because difficult times always lead to better days. A rainbow is symbolic for the end of a transition, crisis, change, or upheaval, and is a sign of a breakthrough. Well, if that didn't put a smile on my face and make me feel just a wee bit better. Within a couple of weeks, I was back in Canada and scheduled both a thermography and an ultrasound exam. As the appointment dates drew nearer and nearer, my anxiety intensified more and more. I had myself convinced that the cancer had spread into the lymph nodes and that this was to be the end of me. I had more sleepless nights, and even my meditations didn't bring me the usual relief from the monkey mind. As I sat waiting for the results of the thermography, I breathed deeply to calm my nervous system. I focused on positive thoughts. Thankfully, the thermography exam showed no change in the tumor and also no cancer in the lymph nodes. At this point, I didn't even care that the tumor hadn't shrunk. I was just so relieved that it hadn't spread into the lymph nodes. Hallelujah. With that good news, I headed to the cancer clinic where I had my ultrasound exam. This time, I was definitely in a better headspace. As I sat there watching the radiologist do his thing, I asked him if he was able to differentiate between scar tissue and the tumor. His answer was no. What? Are you kidding? That was not the answer I was expecting. Knowing that I had a significant mass of scar tissue in my breast from the lumpectomy that I had in 2007, and also knowing that the tumor had intertwined itself within the scar tissue, his answer meant that these checkups had been a huge waste of my time and his. To think of all the anxiety that I'd felt leading up to these appointments, for nothing. Ugh. Regardless, we spent 5 beautiful outdoorsy weeks in Canada that summer, both at a friend's cabin in the woods and on a campground in a luxurious Taj Mahal camper that friends of ours lent to us. I was incredibly grateful for the generosity of our friends and family. I rested, we volunteered at our favorite music festival, and hung out with many friends and family. At the end of August, Ian and I set off to Asia to continue our worldly travels with plans to spend at least 6 months there. Those 6 months ended up turning into 8.5 months. If that wasn't an indication of how much we loved Asia, I don't know what is. We took our time in each country, settling in every little village for a minimum of 10 days so that I had ample time to rest and meditate. Not being the city slicker types, we often would fly to a city and get out of Dodge as soon as possible, in search of jungles and beaches. The benefit of our prolonged stays were that we really got to know each area well and feel more at home with the locals. We fell in love with the locals no matter where we were. Not once were we treated poorly, and I felt comfortable enough to venture out on my own on many occasions. I have no words to describe how incredibly beautiful Mother Nature is over there. And I can't remember how many times I had to pinch myself because I just felt so incredulous that I was lucky enough to spend several months in this magnificent corner of our world. While in Asia, we visited Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Thailand, and Vietnam. Each country had its own charm and its own reason for us to want to go back. At the beginning of our trip, life was wonderful. I felt incredibly grateful to be able to cruise around Asia, mostly on the back of a scooter, and I was pretty much able to pretend that I had no worries, that there was no cancer in my body. That is, until I received some heart-wrenching news towards the end of October while we were in Malaysia. The news that brought me to my knees was that the cancer had, in fact, metastasized to my cervix and uterus. Fuck. I remember the moment I found out like it was yesterday. It felt like the world had stopped turning. I was lightheaded, my whole body was vibrating. My greatest fear had come true. the cancer had actually spread. I now had tumors in 3 different places. 3 out of 4 people die within 5 years when in this predicament. That just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was finally hitting home, and I was no longer able to be in denial. Holy shit. Initially, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, almost 2 years earlier, I had a few additional tests done to make sure that there wasn't cancer anywhere else in my body. Sure enough, a red flag popped up on one of the tests. I received a call from the hospital back in February of 2017 that they wanted me to see a specialist regarding a growth in my reproductive area. I agreed to meet with this specialist to get his opinion on the prognosis. However, when I asked him about it, he said that the only way for him to be sure that it was benign was to perform a biopsy. By then, I had done a fair bit of research on the safety of biopsies and learned that this procedure actually damages the wall of the tumor, which can significantly heighten the risk of the cancer spreading. When I brought this up with the doctor, he blew it off and told me that it was safe and that I had nothing to worry about. By this time, I had started to really question Western medicine and its role in the world of cancer. I was pretty infuriated at his lackadaisical response. I went home to think about it and made the conscious decision not to have the biopsy procedure done. If I was going to heal my body holistically, my reproductive area would be part of that whole as well. We decided not to tell anyone about the growth in my reproductive area, so there wouldn't be even more fear projected towards us. Here I was in Malaysia, about 18 months later, in total shock, and finally willing to admit that deep down I had known that things were not okay in my reproductive area. I had known that there was a high probability that the growth was, in fact, cancerous. Symptoms had been there. Symptoms don't lie. I also knew that cervical cancer often doesn't show symptoms until the later stages, and I had been experiencing them for a while. Despite being aware of all of this, I had not been willing to go there, not wanting to put any energy into it. Instead, I stuffed down my fears, covered them up with a smile, and continued on as if all was well. Denial, denial, denial. Well, no more. This life-changing, infuriating, devastating news forced me to come face to face with the knowledge that the cancer was in fact gaining ground. My game of pretending that everything was great had come to a screeching halt. Now what? I was at a complete loss. I was devastated. Why couldn't I freaking heal my body already? What was I doing wrong? The desperation within me spread like wildfire. My heart was pounding and I was flailing out of control. Other people are healing their bodies with less than what I've put myself through. Why couldn't I? It's not fair. What else do I need to do? For the first time since I started the journey with cancer, I had no comeback. I didn't know what to do anymore. I felt raw, vulnerable, and so tired. There I was, brought to my knees. After spending nearly 2 years trying to make my body healthy, I felt a subtle shift starting to happen within me in that moment of being brought to my knees. There was almost a feeling of relief, an inner knowing that arose within me. It was a knowing that I didn't have to go at this alone anymore. It was a knowing that I was ready to surrender. As a response to this knowing, I uttered the words, "Show me," in meditation. I was finally able to get out of my own way and let my body become healthy. This is the point where my true healing journey began, almost 2 years after the diagnosis. It was to be a journey of surrendering, allowing myself to feel vulnerability, overriding the urge of denial, and discovering self-worth and self-love. In this state, being with my emotional pain body and dissolving it, I was finally able to uncover the core of my health crises and ultimately bring the healing vibrancy back into my body. I feel called to share my story despite feeling somewhat vulnerable about the sharing of it. As a matter of fact, the writing of this book is part of my surrendering commitment. I am surrendering to love. Chapter 5. Uncovering My Authentic Self. One of the many gifts I received of traveling around the world was to experience different cultures and how these cultures have influenced people's beliefs, thoughts, and ultimately their behavior, including how they present themselves to each other and the world. Witnessing this made me more aware that no matter where we live, who we are, or what our status is, most of us want to fit in and be accepted by society. It was no surprise to find that we are influenced by our culture and peers. I realized that I had been no different. I had created my identity in a way that reflected my culture. I had put incredible stress on my body, both emotionally and physically, and behaved in ways that I thought would make me be more worthy and lovable to society. I also realized that who I was in Canada and who I became while traveling the world was not quite the same. When we returned to Canada after our travels, I started hanging out with friends and family who had known me for years. I started to go back to the behaviors and beliefs of the person who I used to be. It was subtle, but I felt it. This was partly because of the expectations that people had of me and the projections that they often unknowingly threw my way. But it also had to do with my own subconscious programming. Elsewhere in the world, people didn't know me. I was able to be whomever I wanted to be. My commitment to surrendering my false egoic identity and reprogramming myself was definitely made easier while I was traveling around the world for that exact reason. No one really had any detailed beliefs or expectations of me, giving me free rein to be and allowing me to recreate myself and become a healthier version of me. The challenge of maintaining the ground that I had gained while traveling became apparent pretty quickly. It would be easy to fall back into my old behavioral patterns, but I knew that the stakes were too high for me to do that. My old programming made me really sick, and there was absolutely no way that I was willing to sabotage the healing journey that I continued to be on. What did that mean? It meant that I had to go against my fear-based egoic reactions and be out of my comfort zone. A lot. I would do whatever it took to avoid falling back into those patterns, even if it meant that I would be going against society's expectations. I was committed to being as authentic as possible. There would be no more hiding, no more dimming my light, and no more trying to fit into society. I had finally found the courage to be seen as my true self. Don't get me wrong, I had to dig deep in order to find the courage to show up and have the willingness to be vulnerable. It wasn't necessarily easy to step out of that zone of society's expectations and dare to present myself in an authentic way with the focus on self-love. Despite my willingness to be vulnerable, I would like to share a tool with you that, if used effectively, will allow you to read my story while letting go of any judgments that you may have towards me, yourself, or anyone. I learned this tool a few years ago from a beautiful and wise Indigenous elder in British Columbia, Canada. I was blessed enough to attend a retreat led by this elder, where he enlightened us with the Aboriginal teachings of the medicine wheel in concert with the plant medicines ayahuasca and washuma, aka San Pedro. It was a powerful week. One of these teachings that stands out for me is based on the phrase, "I am that too." I am that too is an amazing tool that I've used countless times since being taught it at this retreat. These 4 little words can take us from judgment to compassion in a split second. It's powerful and it works. The beauty of it is so simple. I am that too is based on the fact that we've all been there, done that, if not in this lifetime, then surely in another. I was able to put this teaching to good use within days of being home after this week-long retreat, when I was sitting at an intersection, watching a truck speed through a red light while the driver was talking on his cell phone. Thankfully, all the other drivers were paying attention, and there was no collision. As I sat there at this intersection in utter disgust, I felt all kinds of judgments for this truck driver. Then I remembered the I am that too exercise and softly spoke the words out loud. I am that too. Instantly, I felt the judgments disappear. Of course, I had driven distracted before. Although I tried to avoid it, there were times that I had answered phone calls, read texts, changed music channels, or ate a sandwich while behind the wheel. Who am I to judge this guy? With that, I had let go of my judgments and continued on with my drive, feeling light-hearted. This was a far cry from the previous time that I had encountered a distracted driver just a few weeks earlier, prior to being at the event. That time, I had been cut off by a middle-aged woman and had narrowly escaped a collision. This woman had been completely oblivious of any wrongdoing because she had been too busy chatting away on her phone. I had such strong judgments of her, especially because I had literally just had the distracted driving chat with my 16-year-old son, who had passed his driver's test the previous day. I remember being so angry at this woman that I even wrote a post on Facebook about it. Something along the lines of, how can we expect our kids to be safe drivers when there are irresponsible middle-aged people out there on our roads setting such poor examples? As you can imagine, I did not feel lighthearted at all. Instead, I kept the judgmental, angry vibe going for the entire day by thinking about it, talking about it, and discussing it on social media. In other words, I let it ruin my day. The gist of this tool is that we have a choice in every moment of how we are going to react towards an individual, in a situation, or to a story, such as mine. We can be judgmental and angry, or we can allow ourselves to be able to relate to it somehow and feel compassion, understanding, and allowance. The latter are all emotions that have higher frequency, which will keep us feeling great throughout the day. Not only will the I am that too exercise help the people around us that we'd otherwise judge, it helps our inner vibration too, by keeping the stress hormones at bay and making us feel more lighthearted instead. It's a win-win situation. Chapter 6. Blissfully Unaware. If you had asked me 5, 10, 20 years ago how I'd rate my happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, I would have told you that I'd rate myself pretty high, at least an 8 or a 9. I considered myself a pretty happy-go-lucky gal and felt grateful for the life that I had. Despite a couple of dark clouds that hovered around, I believed that I had a great life. I had a beautiful, loving husband and 2 amazing kids. I enjoyed my work most of the time. I had wonderful friends. I loved our family activities such as camping, sports, music, and lots of other stuff. The list goes on and on. Was I faking it for all those years then? I realize now how much I had been fooling most people for years by covering everything up with a smile and embracing the attitude of, nothing going on here. That makes me seem pretty inauthentic, doesn't it? Not a very nice label to be stuck with, that's for sure. I'm guessing that my friends and family would probably feel a bit cheated by it too, when they realize what my game was. They may think they know me, when in reality, all they got was my smiley performance. The thing is, I really had no idea at the time that I was fooling people, because I had fooled myself most of all. This performance was all I knew my life to be, and all I knew how to be. I didn't know any better. I was blissfully unaware. Approximately 95% of who we are is programmed into our subconscious. This programming is created by the experiences of our past, especially during childhood. Initially, we adopt a behavior in order to feel safe, making it a survival technique. The problem is that as we get older, the threat that resulted in the creation of the technique in the first place is likely no longer there. Because we have been programmed in such a way that we don't know any better, we often continue in the same manner for the rest of our lives. What were my programs? Here's one. Doing whatever it took to avoid rocking the boat by being a people-pleaser extraordinaire. Here's another. Sweeping all my stresses and problems under the rug, pretending that they didn't exist. It worked brilliantly. It meant that I no longer needed to worry about anything, and I could live happily ever after. Or at least that was the plan. This plan worked like a charm for decades. So why mess with a good thing? What's up with all the shit-disturbing shenanigans that I'd gotten myself into with surrendering to everything under the sun? I finally had that aha moment of how to get rid of that uninvited guest. Cancer, of course, who'd been crashing my party for almost 2 years. This solution would burst my ego-based happy-go-lucky bubble, but I was finally willing to let that happen. It took me long enough. And it wasn't because there were no signs along the way, because there certainly were, like that little nudge I got back in the winter of 2017. Let me rephrase that. I probably got lots of nudges back then, but I actually became aware of this particular little nudge. It served me well at that time, but apparently I was not ready to completely burst my comfort zone bubble just yet. So it was to be only a one-off. Better than nothing though, right? Here's what happened. It was a month or so after getting the diagnosis. Ian had done or said something the previous day that had upset me enough that I had lost sleep over it. In the past, I would have swept that under the rug. However, this nudge made me realize that avoiding confrontation would not help the healing of my body, no matter how insignificant it may have seemed to be. It also created an awareness within me that I needed to come clean on a bigger scale. We were on the road. Ian was driving while I was sitting in the passenger seat with my brain going in overdrive. My body was overheating and my heart was pounding uncomfortably while I was navigating the inner conflict. Not wanting to do this, but knowing I needed to, I finally gathered up the courage and asked Ian to pull into a deserted parking lot so that we could talk in the privacy of our car. I was a nervous wreck. I started our talk with, "None of what I'm about to say is meant to hurt you. I have avoided confrontation all these years for that exact reason. I love you and I don't want to hurt you. However, I also know that I have to break this habit if I want to heal my body." With my heart in my throat, I continued with bringing up the times where I hadn't spoken up for myself in relation to Ian. I was so far out of my comfort zone with admitting all of this. These admissions made me feel so vulnerable that the tears were flowing freely and my body was vibrating. After I had emptied out, there was silence. Then it was Ian's turn. Ian also was not one to be confrontational, and it was just as uncomfortable for him to do this, but he did. Both our eyes were opened by this conversation, making me realize that life truly is all about perception. As it turned out, I had done or said things in the past that Ian perceived in a way that hurt him, which had not been my intent at all. Likewise, Ian had also said and done things to me in the past that I had misinterpreted. About 2 hours later, when both of us had emptied out and cried and hugged, we felt lighter. Our relationship had just evolved a little, and for that I was grateful. Communication is really the crutch of a great relationship, and Ian and I made a commitment to each other right there in the car that we would keep this line of communication open from that point onward. Let's make our good relationship even better. However, the avoidance habit of covering my discomforts up with a smile proved to still be pretty powerful. Our commitment faltered more often than not, until our time in Malaysia. I had discovered that the cancer was an indication that I was sitting on a proverbial minefield where numerous mines were hiding out, making it pretty dangerous territory. It was one of those the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know awarenesses. If I hadn't uncovered these mines, it would have just been a matter of time, in my opinion, before my body would have perished. My realization of the existence of this minefield was shortly after that fateful day in Malaysia when I received word that the cancer had spread. By committing to my new surrendering practice, I made a pact with myself to delve into the unknown territory of this minefield. As I explored and surrendered at a conscious level, mines were being detonated. Usually one at a time, but occasionally there were a couple that let go simultaneously. This exploration activated my emotional pain body, which had been dormant for so long. Although I was feeling pretty banged up while on this exploration mission, there were no lasting wounds. Only relief, gratitude, compassion, and of course, love. You can't surrender something if you're not even aware of its existence. This statement pretty much sums it up for me. When I was blissfully unaware, I was essentially blind to the fact that my programmed thoughts and beliefs were the root cause of the cancer, and therefore not able to heal. Thankfully, I had some help pointing me in the right direction. I remember how surprised I had been a year prior when I first discovered in an ayahuasca ceremony that I had low self-worth, simply for being female. How could that be? I lived in a country where gender equality was pretty strong. I had an education. I had been a contributing provider in my family. Ian respected me. I was raised by a strong woman. I could go on and on. If I was struggling with that, I couldn't even imagine how other women around the world must feel. This was the first message that I received that indicated to me how oblivious I had been. Did I really know who I even was at the core? Another message that I received around the same time was that there would be 100% chance of healing my body from cancer if I loved myself unconditionally. Love heals. My initial reaction to that one was, but I do lots of things for myself. I exercise, I eat healthy, I do fun stuff. That's all loving myself, right? Now I know that the undercurrent of those activities certainly were not based in love. Not even close. As I sit here, I realize that my surrendering journey took me from blissfully unaware to painfully aware to ultimately becoming blissfully aware over the span of about 10 months. The bliss in the blissfully unaware doesn't hold a candle to the bliss in the blissfully aware. Not even close. I will also admit that if I didn't have my motivational coach, aka Cancer, in my corner throughout the painfully aware stage, I may very well have run for the hills. There were quite a few moments where I was not just taken but thrown out of my comfort zone without a life vest. All I had was a trusting that this was the way to vibrant health. I endured despair, anger, fear, guilt, shame, and everything in between. It was no wonder I had become so skillful at avoiding shit, because it truly was shitty. In the process of becoming blissfully aware, I discovered that the happiness that I had been feeling was a reaction to people, places, or experiences. In other words, that which was outside of myself and could come and go at the drop of a hat determined my level of happiness. I have found that there is so much more depth in joy. Joy is a state of being that does not change just because the weather changes. Someone doesn't want to be your friend anymore, or you lose your job. Joy is unconditional. Joy is the essence of being blissfully aware. Cancer initially gifted me the strength to be relentless in my pursuit of making it with this beautiful body of mine. As time went on, though, I felt that there was a strength within me that was blossoming. This inner strength is what I now tap into, and I know that it will never let me down. My suggestion to you would be to find your inner strength and do this for yourself, preferably before shit hits the fan in your life. Listen to the little nudges and go on your own exploration journey, just for the heck of it. You may just be surprised of what you'll find, like I was. And don't let the painfully aware stage stop you. Be strong, be committed, and be with it, because on the other side of the pain is eternal bliss. Eternal bliss! I promise you it's there. Go for it. It will be the best thing you'll ever do for yourself, and you are worthy of it. Thank you for listening to part 1 of Healed by Cancer. If you would like to continue part 2 of this book, please visit Amazon, where it's available as Kindle, paperback, or audiobook. If you are interested in connecting with me, whether you have cancer or not, please visit my website, innerhealthouterwealth.com, or email me, jayka@innerhealthouterwealth.com, or you can find me on Facebook under my name, Jayka Duncan. Namaste.